Hello and welcome back to Dukascopy TV. Now on May the 18th, the Swiss will vote to see if they will be able to increase the minimum wage to 22 Swiss francs per hour. Welcome to Hollenbeck Unleashed. I'm joined once again in the studio by Dr. Frank Hollenbeck from the International University of Geneva. Frank, welcome.
Always glad to be here.
Now, as I mentioned in that intro, on May the 18th, we've got a vote in Switzerland where we could see a rise up to 22 Swiss francs per hour. What do you think of this Swiss action to raise the minimum wage, and could it help or hinder the Swiss economy, do you think?
Well, we live in a world with a constraint called gravity, okay? And we can adapt to gravity by creating innovations such as airplanes, but we can't really defy the law of gravity by jumping out of a plane without a parachute. And the same thing is true about economics and the law of scarcity, okay? This attempt to raise the minimum wage to 22 Swiss francs is really an attempt to defy scarcity, okay? And the thing about a wage is that it's the price of labor, and it's determined by supply and demand, okay? And we can see that if we were to raise the minimum wage, it would create a surplus of labor. That's basically unemployment, okay? And we can see that some people would get a higher minimum wage, but a lot of others would be simply thrown under the bus, okay? Also, long term, what would happen is businesses would switch from using labor to automation. We can see that in France, where we have, it's almost impossible to get a cashier at a supermarket, or you go to McDonald's and your order will be taken by a machine, okay? You have to put in your credit card and you have to type in your order, okay? Now, if we look at the empirical studies that have been done on the minimum wage law, we can see that when we look at EU countries with and without the minimum wage law, we can see that those with the minimum wage laws have much higher unemployment rate. And when we look at youth unemployment, we can see that countries that have minimum wage laws tend to have youth unemployment that's almost twice as high. And the reason is because minimum wage laws hurt the most vulnerable. It actually hurts those with the lowest skill levels, okay? And those who are just entering the labor markets. So in other words, it really hurts those who are the young, okay? In the sense they can't get their first jobs, so they can't develop the skills necessary to be productive adults. Okay. Now, Obama for many years has been trying to increase the minimum wage. Okay. But as we can see here, we can see that from this survey of CFOs, we could see that any increase in the minimum wage would increase unemployment. And if we were to get $10 an hour, as Obama suggests, it would actually significantly reduce the amount of hiring of low-skilled workers.
Okay, Frank, here's a quote from renowned economist and statistician Milton Friedman. He says a minimum wage law is in reality a law that makes it illegal for an employer to hire a person with limited skills. The real tragedy of minimum wage laws is that they are supported by well-meaning groups who want to reduce poverty, but the people who are hurt most by high minimums are the most poverty-stricken. Do you agree with his comments?
Well, he's absolutely right in the sense that we have a situation where we have an employer willing to hire someone, okay? And we have somebody who's willing to work at that wage. So it's a voluntary exchange. So basically what we have is we have an outside entity, which is the government, that's basically imposing a restriction on mutually beneficial transaction, okay? And as Milton Friedman indicated, and as I've already said, is the people who are going to get hurt the most are the ones who are the most fragile, okay? And now, I understand that these individuals who are pushing this law, they actually want to reduce poverty and they want to reduce income inequalities. But what they don't realize is that it's going to do just the opposite. Okay. There was a very good book by Hayek, which is called The Road to Serfdom. And he basically explained how socialism, even though it was paved with good intentions, ultimately led to the exact opposite of what the socialists wanted, which was a totalitarian regime.
So in your opinion, what is the solution to all this? How does Switzerland get to 22 francs per hour for its minimum wage?
Well, we have to work with the law of scarcity, not try to defy the law of scarcity. We have to realize that an employer is willing to pay 22 Swiss francs an hour if he gets more than 22 Swiss francs an hour out of you, and that's called your marginal productivity. Let me ask you a simple question. Why is your standard of living better than people in Africa? Is it because you work harder or because you're more intelligent? No. The reason your standard of living is better than the people in Africa is because your labor is grafted onto a much larger capital base. Okay? So in other words, you're a lot more productive because you have a lot of capital to work with. Okay? That will determine your marginal productivity. Okay, and as we can see from this graph, this supply and demand graph, the real solution is to have the demand curve shift up until we get to a price of $22 an hour. Well, how do we get that demand curve to shift up? Well, we get that demand curve to shift up by increasing the amount of capital that we have in our economy. And how do we do that? Well, we need stable money. Okay, and we need to have policies that increase the amount of savings, because ultimately investment in plant and equipment is determined by the level of real savings that's generated by an economy. So if we want to get to $22 an hour, we actually have to work with the law of scarcity, not try to defy it.
Okay, Frank, well, we'll have to wait till May 18th for that vote, and we'll see what happens then. Frank, thanks very much for coming to the studio again. Always detailed as ever. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all we've got time for at the moment on Dukascopy TV. Stay with us, though. We'll bring you more updates and interviews throughout the day. But from me and from Frank here in the studio, bye-bye.